Bruce Iglauer is an American businessman and record producer who founded Alligator Records as an independent record label featuring blues music.
Real rock and roll news. From the legends of rock, you found rockonamerica.live. We're bringing rock and roll to America and beyond. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe.
In the heart of America, a businessman and record producer by the name of Bruce Iglauer carved out a niche for himself, birthing the independent record label, Alligator Records. His love for blues music was the driving force behind this venture. With a keen ear for authentic blues, Iglauer has been instrumental in shaping the careers of many iconic blues musicians, showcasing their raw talent to the world. His dedication to the genre has not only kept the blues alive, but has also allowed it to thrive in the modern world. Today, Alligator Records stands as a testament to Iglauer's vision and determination. It's a beacon of hope for blues artists around the globe, proving that the heart and soul of music can indeed triumph over commercialism. Join us as Mark Lewis and R.O.A. delve into an exclusive interview with the man himself, Bruce Iglauer. Dive into the world of blues, explore the journey of Alligator Records, and discover the power of music that comes straight from the heart. This is more than just an interview. It's an exploration of passion, perseverance, and the power of blues music. It's a story of how one man's love for the blues has resonated across the globe. Stay tuned.
Hi, this is Mark with Rock of America magazine, and today I have the absolute pleasure of interviewing a gentleman we've talked a couple times on the phone before. Nothing special or important or to be mentioned here, but guy is a genuine, very, very nice, wonderful guy. He's going to kind of explain why what I'm about to say is accurate and inaccurate, but in one sense, as far as I see it, you had labels like Chess and DJ and labels like that. Atlantic started kind of this way, doing what he's doing. In one sense, you could say that he's the modern-day Leonard Chess, but in another sense, he's going to explain why not. The guy's brilliant, and he said had a pulse on the blues, and I may be wrong on this, but I believe that he has what is now the biggest blues label in the world. At least it's the most well-known blues label in the world. Without further ado, and Bruce, you're going to have to help me with your last name because I'm going to butcher this one. I'm going to give this a shot. Bruce Iglauer?
Pretty close. It's Iglauer.
Iglauer.
And don't worry, you'll never meet anybody else with the same name.
Okay, I don't. How are you doing?
Fine, thanks, and thanks for inviting me to do this with you.
No, this is a pleasure for me because I'm just going to say this real quick. I latched onto your label over 20 years ago with 4701. You can tell what everybody, as we start this, please tell everybody what 4701 is.
Well, 4701 was my very first release, which actually was released 40 years ago. This coming August, it's the first album by the first band we recorded, Hound Dog Taylor and the House Rockers, and it's just called Hound Dog Taylor and the House Rockers. It was made in 2 nights in May and June of 1971 with this tiny inheritance that I got, and I started selling it out of the back of my car in the fall of 71.
And tell everybody why I'm wrong about the introduction, where it cuts, for you, where it cuts from what I said.
Well, Leonard Chess and Jimmy and Vivian Bracken, who ran DJ, and to a great extent, Ahmet Erdogan and his brother and Jerry Westberg, who ran Atlantic, were all people who had great taste in music, and I'm happy to be mentioned in the same breath with them in terms of their knowledge of blues and R&B and their ability to choose talent. But they were all about making hit singles. Eventually, Atlantic did move in somewhat in a different direction, but primarily they were making records for the radio, especially for R&B radio, and for the jukebox, and of course to sell singles because that was the main business at the time. So they were making records that were a minute and a half to 2.5, maybe 3 minutes long, that were sold initially as 78s, later as 45s. Albums were very much afterthoughts to them, and mostly collections of singles. I, on the other hand, started making albums trying to capture capture the vibe that I was getting and hearing bands in the little blues clubs on the south side and the west side in the black neighborhoods in Chicago. I wasn't worried about how long the songs were. I wasn't thinking about any kind of hit-driven radio or about jukeboxes. I just wanted to get that feel that I could get at Florence's Lounge or Teresa's or Pepper's or the 1815 Club. Try to capture that on an album, originally a vinyl album, later, 8 tracks, I made those, cassettes, CDs, digital downloads, however people want to listen to music. But I was never about singles, I was never about hits. The other thing I would say is, actually all the labels at that time, I was going to say both Chess and BJ, because I was kind of trying to leave Atlanta out of this a little bit, but all the labels at that time, their artists questioned their business practices a great deal. The artists felt that they were often getting ripped off. Whether they were or not, I don't know, because I don't know what the contracts were. I didn't see the books. But there was a constant level of suspicion between the artists and the record companies. From day one, I tried very hard to be completely scrupulous about royalties, not only the right amounts, but getting them right on time. No funny business, no excuses. We owe, we pay. One of the very first things that I did that established my reputation here in Chicago was within months after that first R.O.A. record came out, since it sold so much better than we anticipated, I owed him some royalties. And boy, seconds after I gave him that first royalty payment, every blues musician in Chicago knew that Alligator Records paid royalties. And it kind of made my reputation in this town. Nice.
And I want to go back to the beginning with you, and then I want to mention a couple artists, and you pick a couple artists, and I also want to talk about the fact that right now out, and we reviewed it, absolutely phenomenal. Bluesville also did a whole program on it, so if anybody has satellite radio, they may rebroadcast that again. They did like a 2-hour special with you going through the album. It's the 40th anniversary of Alligator Records, and it's kind of a retrospective, but it also has some of the newer material, newer artists on there as well, and it's amazing.
Yeah, it's a double CD, 38 tracks, about 159 minutes of music that starts from recordings in the early 70s and goes right up to music that we've literally released within the last few months.
And I want to leave everybody hanging there because we're going to finish the interview talking a little bit about that.
Okay.
I want to let everybody kind of hang and wait, but doggone it, Mark's up for this again, which is my point. You guys have to listen to the interview. So let's go back to the beginning with you. When you were growing up, what were your musical influences? What were you really digging as a kid?
Well, nothing that had anything to do with the blues whatsoever. I grew up initially on what my mother liked. My father died when I was a kid, and I listened to the music my mother had in our home, which was primarily Broadway show tunes. I grew up on the music from Oklahoma and South Pacific and Get Your Gun and all kinds of things that are just completely the opposite of blues. When I was in school, I began hearing what was a normal, top 40 hit-driven radio. There was no rock and roll on FM. It was all about singles on AM. So, I listened to the normal kinds of things people, were listening to at that time. Boys and the Beatles. And I also listened to a lot of rather commercial folk music from the early and mid-70s.
Can you say that one part over again? I'm sorry.
Sure. Where do you want me to start?
The folk music.
Oh, I also listened to a lot of rather commercial folk music from that era. Just the things that were popular at that time. Artists like Peter, Paul, and Mary, and the Kingston Trio, and nothing truly traditional. Just the kind of pop folk music that had this little burst of popularity in 62, 63, 64. It was actually at folk festivals that I began hearing my first blues, and that's how I got converted to the blues. And after that, kind of everything I was listening to up till that time seemed very plastic and false to me. It didn't seem like very honest music.
So you were kind of getting turned on the more traditional folk blues like the Lead Belly stuff and Robert Johnson and stuff like that.
Well, Robert Johnson's recordings weren't available at that time. The first blues that I heard that struck me was not recordings. What struck me was live music.
Okay.
And in 1966, just after I started college, I took a trip to Chicago. I didn't go to college in Chicago. I don't actually come from Chicago. I come from Ohio.
Okay. Well, I come from Detroit, so you know what happened up there for a kid to grow up there in the 60s and 70s.
Well, I grew up in Cincinnati where James Brown and Freddie King were recording, and I knew nothing about that. I had no idea it existed in Cincinnati. It was entirely a mystery to me. But I came to Chicago, to the University of Chicago Folk Festival, and there I heard a solo artist with a slide, metal slide on his little finger, Mississippi Fred McDowell.
Oh, yeah.
And it just, straight out of Como, Mississippi, and the music just grabbed me, and it really shook me up, and seemed to yell at me that this was something that I had to hear more of. It was a very moving experience for me, and I went back to this little town where I was going to college, and I went to our record shop, and I ordered the one and only Mississippi Fred McDowell album, LP at that time, vinyl. And it took them over 6 months to locate a copy. It was on the R.O.A. label out of Berkeley, California, which had very poor distribution. So I quickly learned not only that something about the blues, but something about the independent labels that recorded the blues and how relatively obscure these recordings were.
Yeah.
And as I got into this music, and remember that I'm listening to slide guitar players.
Right.
I'm listening to very raw blues. As I got into it more, I began collecting every blues album I could get my hands on. Initially, more acoustic things, and then I kind of found my way into electric Chicago blues, and I began buying, Muddy Waters records, the few that were available on album, because, as I said earlier, this music was, for the most part, getting recorded as singles. Not Fred McDowell. Fred McDowell was getting recorded by Chris Rakowitz at R.O.A. Records, who's a huge hero of mine. But Muddy Waters, the Muddy Waters albums that were available were collections of his 78s and 45s. They were essentially greatest hits collections. And I bought those. I bought Howlin' Wolf, Little Johnny Hooker. There wasn't a lot available. And at one point, I read an article, actually in a folk music magazine, that mentioned the existence of a store in Chicago called the Jazz Record Mart. And it said that the guy who ran that store, a guy named Bob Kester, was an expert on blues. And if you went there, he would take you out to the clubs in the Black Ghetto in Chicago to hear blues live. And I never forgot that. And a few years later, I made my way to Chicago, and exactly that happened. I found Bob Kester at this little hole-in-the-wall store called the Jazz Record Mart, and got him to take me out to hear music on the South Side, introduced me to Junior Wells and Lefty Diz and a bunch of other musicians. And eventually I convinced him that I should come and work for him. And that was my entree into the record business and into the blues world.
So what got you decided, what made you decide and got the idea, I'm going to start a record label? How did that start?
Well, when I went to work for Bob Kester at Delmark, first of all, I should explain that this was a tiny record store in a rundown building, and the record label that he ran, Delmark, existed in the basement of the store, which you got to by opening a trapdoor and walking down some very narrow stairs. So I was working in a dank basement with roaches and mice, and mostly packing boxes. And every night I was going out to the blues clubs on the south side and the west side, hearing everybody from Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf and Otis Rush to some pretty obscure musicians like Boston Blackie and Little Addison and guys who never made a record, and just having a wonderful time. I was working for almost no money, so I would buy one beer and nurse that beer all night long.
Yeah, I know that story. I know those stories from college. So
these were clubs that cost 50 cents or $1 at the door, or sometimes nothing. Excuse me. Eventually, I went to a club on the south side called playing music on Sunday afternoons, and I heard a band called Hound Dog Taylor and the House Rockers. Another guy with a slide on his little finger, or actually, since he had 6 fingers, he could play a slide on his 5th finger, his second littlest finger, playing a $50 Japanese guitar through a $100 Sears Roebuck amplifier, accompanied only by a drummer and another guitar player who played all the bass parts on a regular guitar. The music was just raw and distorted and rough and rhythmically driving and just loads of fun. Most of it was up-tempo, danceable, boogie stuff, but every once in a while they'd just do a real searing, slow blues. And I fell in love with this band.
And can I ask you a question, Bruce?
Sure.
What I'd read about this was, too, this is a gentleman that basically, they had to change music. If he played at a long stretch, they had to change musicians behind him because this guy could play for 8 hours straight, basically.
Well, that's a little exaggerated, but he played long sets. He would often play a 3-hour set. You couldn't change too many musicians behind it because Hound Dog had a particular groove and rhythm, and there weren't a lot of guys who could play very well with him. Very often, when he'd go to jams, he'd sit in and the music would just fall apart because people didn't understand how to play that Hound Dog beat. So he had to have the right drummer and the right guitar player, and the best ones were the ones I heard there at Florence, is Brewer Phillips on guitar and Harvey on drums. Now, occasionally he'd use some other guys. This was a very rough and ready band. They were playing for the whole band. You could hire for Friday or Saturday for $45. And on weekdays they played for less.
Amazing.
Sometimes $30 for the whole band. So during the summer, Brewer Phillips the other guitar player, would work construction when the weather was good, and Hound Dog would have to get other guys because Brewer Phillips was unavailable.
Right.
But the magic was the 3 of them playing together. There were other guys who sounded good with Hound Dog, but these guys sounded great. They just were all on exactly the same wavelength. And their groove and their rhythm feel was just perfect together. So I fell in love with this band. I went back to my boss, Bob Kessler at Iglauerk Records, and I said, "You've got to record this band." And then I had the balls to say, and I should produce them. Now, I had been in the studio about a half a dozen times at that point, and I was never in charge of anything. I was the gopher, and the gopher is the guy who goes for sandwiches or goes to the liquor store. You go for something. All I did was follow orders and watch. So I was in no way prepared to produce a record, but I was too stupid to know that. So I suggested I should produce this band, and my boss kind of said, gee, I don't know, and kind of dismissed me on this. And I kept coming to him, and I could not get him interested, and so I thought, well, I'll show him. I'll do it myself. And basically, Alligator started because I couldn't get my boss to make a record with my favorite band. And I wanted to make sure that band got recorded and that I could capture some of that feel from Florence's Lounge at that time on vinyl for the world to hear. And I wanted to share this music that I loved.
And how did the label start to take off? Because correct me if I'm wrong on this. And like I said, this is stuff I read years ago, and that's why I wanted to talk to you about this and get everything accurate on this. You were starting this out of your apartment, correct?
Right. I was living in a one-room efficiency apartment in the uptown neighborhood of Chicago, which was not a great neighborhood. It was a building with 4 floors. I lived on the 4th floor, and sometimes the elevator worked, and sometimes it didn't. And when it didn't, I was hauling boxes of LPs up and down the stairs.
Okay, so how did from starting with the first album when you recorded the self-titled album, Hound Dog, Taylor and the House Rockers, how did things start to progress for you?
Well, it happened very slowly. I was still working at Iglauerk Records, but I took a leave of absence and I put 1,000 copies of the record, which was all there were, in my car. I had a list of distributors in different cities, because at that time you had to have a distributor in every major city, because LPs were just too ungainly and too heavy to be shipping from one point around the country. Excuse me. Plus, there were local stores and local chains in every market, and so you needed a distributor who knew how to deal with all of those people, all those local people.
Right.
So I got in the car. I had a list of the distributors, and I had a list of radio stations. This was just when FM stations began to play rock. Before that, most FM stations were classical stations, and there were very few FM stations. There were a lot of AM stations that owned an FM signal that they never used. So starting around 67 and 68, there began to be, a bunch of, for lack of a better word, hippies, and I guess you would call me one of those too in a lot of ways. I mean, I had a beard and big hair, and had a certain level of funkiness about me. Anyway, there were people who went on these stations and said, we'll sell ads to the local waterbed store and play the same rock records we played in our dorm rooms. And so this whole brand of radio, which was called progressive rock radio, started up because these FM signals were not getting used. So at that point, rock was on FM, and it was still very loose. There were no playlists. Every DJ did his own show.
It was also what was called free format, where basically you could play whatever would fit on there, correct?
Exactly, yeah. It wasn't unusual to be playing a well-known rock band, but always the album track, not the single.
Right.
Then play a folk song, a jazz tune, something classical, some spoken word. It could be anything. It was all very stream of consciousness with the DJs just grabbing records that they liked. And it was a fun form of radio because it was very much in the foreground radio. The DJs programmed the shows expecting that people were really paying attention and that they were sharing music. It wasn't going to be background music. They wanted the world to hear this music. So I have a list of these stations, almost all of which were no more than a year or two old. And I drove from station to station, meeting each individual DJ. Sometimes they'd stay at the station for 24 hours, meeting DJs as they came on their shifts, giving them a personal copy of my Hound Dog Taylor record, and begging them for airplay. And because these DJs had no playlists, they didn't need to answer to a program director or a music director. They could just play what they felt like. So a bunch of them, feeling like I was kind of like them, I was at that point I was 24 when that first album came out, which would be 1971. And so they looked at me, and I looked like them, and they looked like me, and they thought, sure, I'll play this record for this guy. What the heck? And sometimes they even put me on the air and interviewed me about it. So I would go and get radio play, and then I would go to the distributor that I picked in that market and say, these stations are already playing this record. Would you be interested in distributing it? Well, if the record was getting airplay, they figured there was going to be a market for it.
Right.
And so most of them said, sure, they'd be interested. So I left them, with 50 or 100 copies, and then drove to the next city and did the same thing. So I drove from Chicago to Detroit to Cleveland to Buffalo to Albany to Hartford to Boston to New York to Philadelphia to Washington, D.C., doing the same thing in every city. And basically that was when I ran out of my leave of absence time for Delmark Records and had to go back to Chicago. So by the time I returned to Chicago, I had distributors in a number of major markets. I was getting radio play, and basically nobody had worked a blues record to this kind of radio in this manner. So I had opened a lot of doors, and a lot of those stations were my friends for years.
Awesome.
And I was really making it up as I went along. There were no rules, and I kind of tried to make it up as I went along since then.
I think you still have to do that even in my end. You just have to kind of figure out there's no game plan per se.
Well, the music business, the record business has changed so much in the last few years. Of course, since everything went digital and since you could download music and since music began to be stolen and since record stores closed up and since internet sales became so important and since place to make sales, that most of the rules I learned, in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s don't apply at all. I've had to just relearn this business as it's changed year after year. I can't live in the past.
When did you know that finally you realized that the label was finally becoming successful?
Well, I kept my job at Delmark for about 6 months, maybe 8 months after that first record came out. And at that point, my boss sat me down and said, you got to make up your mind. Either you're working for me or you're working for yourself. That you can't be working for yourself under my roof. And, I was getting a lot of calls there and doing a lot of business on his time, and he was being pretty nice to me about it. But he was right. It was time for me to get going. So I began being my only employee in the spring of 1972, and it took about 5 years before I could afford a full-time employee. I think that it probably took the best part of the first 10 years before I was confident that the company wouldn't go bankrupt the next day. It was very hand-to-mouth. For the first 15 years of the company, I lived in the same place where the label was. First in a one-room apartment, then in a two-room apartment, and then in a house. In fact, I still live in the house where the label used to live. Finally, it just got too big, and I couldn't fit it in the house. So I had to get a business building.
Right, and what was the first artist that really, maybe it was Hound Dog, but what was the first one that you would say was a really, really big star that people came to know, and, they look back at Alligator and they go, that was the guy that gave the person the chance?
Well, Hound Dog certainly was a very important artist to me. When I started, I didn't even think that I was going to do multiple albums by the same artist. I could go out on a Saturday night in Chicago, and I could hear 40 blues bands, 40 different blues bands, all in ghetto clubs. And I thought, well, there are all these great bands, I'll just record one album by each. But commercial realities set in pretty quickly. When I recorded Big Walter Horton, who didn't sell nearly as well as Hound Dog, or Some Seals, who was completely unknown at that time, and also didn't sell nearly as well as Hound Dog, I realized that I was going to have to re-record Hound Dog Taylor, which wasn't painful. I was booking the band and managing the band and being on the road with the band, so making another album was easy enough, but that was the first change in my dream. After that, probably the next artist who really got national attention for us was Albert Collins.
Okay.
Although in retrospect, everybody thinks that Coco Taylor, the Queen of the Blues, was such an important signing. In fact, the first album that she did for us was not a good seller, and it was a question whether I was going to do a second album because her first album sales were that disappointing. Albert Collins had been, the master of Telecaster, had been a pretty well-known blues artist at the end of the 60s and in the early 70s. He had played, the Fillmore Auditoriums on the West Coast and done a lot of the rock and roll circuit. But by the end of the 70s, when he came to Alligator, his career was kind of in bad shape. He didn't have a regular band. He would go to different parts of the country and hire local bands as his backup bands. He didn't have a real booking agent. He didn't have management. He didn't have a record deal. Albert Collins had been a guy, when I started my label, I never thought I would record anybody as famous as Albert Collins was in my world. But by the time, at the end of the 70s, my company was growing and his career was shrinking. So I hooked up with him, brought him to Chicago, and we recorded him with, he lived on the West Coast. He'd come from Texas with his great guitar sound. He'd gone to the West Coast. He was living out in L.A., but we brought him to Chicago to record with Chicago musicians, and he loved the band so much that it ended up being his touring band. These guys that we put him together with to go in the studio. He made a record called Ice Pickin' that turned out to be one of our classic records, really great seller, and because Albert had a national reputation amongst blues bands, when he came to Alligator at the end of the 70s, It marked, he was the first artist not from Chicago that I recorded, and it marked a step up in the eyes of the blues world to bring somebody who had a national reputation like Albert Collins. And things just grew from there. We sang Johnny Winter after he left Columbia. We sang Ray Buchanan. Artists were just flocking to us because there were so few recording opportunities for blues artists, and because we were treating people right.
Yeah, I might ask you one more question. I want to ask selfish little question about two artists in particular that, after Hound Dog Taylor, I started that really got latched onto and fell in love with. What was probably the most amazing story of all the artists you work with, the one that, maybe it's either you didn't think you were going to be able to find that person, or you had heard horror stories about this person was a nightmare to work with, and it was the complete opposite, they were just wonderful, or you had saw something, you had seen something in that person, you're like, they're not worth it, and you saw something special, and they really became something special. Just kind of, what is one of those most stand-up moments for you in your career that you look back on as something that you always refer to?
Boy, that's tough because there's
a lot of.
I've worked with very few artists who are really that difficult to work with. For the most part, I've been extraordinarily lucky in the artists I've worked with.
But I mean,
very few of them have been that difficult.
But have you heard any stories about anybody that you had heard horror stories, but you turned out they weren't that way?
Well, I would say that was true of Johnny Winter, who I heard was very high-strung and difficult. But because he and I became friends before we got involved in doing business together, we met at a gig in New York. He came out to the Bottom Line to see my artist Son Seals, and I was on the road being the best roadie in the blues, which is what I like to try to be. And Johnny came backstage, and we just started talking about old records, and we liked each other so much that he came out to Chicago to visit me. And just stayed, in the same house where Alligator was, came out and spent a weekend, and we just hung out in blues clubs and spent the night sitting up all night listening to old records after we get back from the clubs. And we liked each other so much that it just developed as a friendship. Some years later, probably at least 3 or 4 years after that, Johnny's deal with Columbia ran out, Columbia, which would now be Sony, and he went to his manager. And Johnny was a guy who was used to getting his own way, and to explain to his manager how passionate he felt, he literally grabbed his manager by the throat and started squeezing and said, "I want to go to Chicago and make blues records for Alligator." His manager had never heard of Alligator and was kind of horrified that rather than being strangled to death, agreed to set up a deal between us. When Johnny got out here, I discovered that, he was very high-strung. He's just an energized, nervous guy. But, boy, when he got in the studio with a bunch of real blues musicians, he just had a hell of a good time. We would laugh and joke and give each other a lot of shit, and it didn't matter. We could argue about things, but ultimately our mutual love of the blues was what made those records work so well.
What was one of your most surprising finds out there that just for any reason, whether it was you weren't sure if it was going to be saleable or people were really going to latch on to the artist, or it was just like, wow, where was this at? Because that may be one of the two people may ask about. But what was, and then I'm just going to ask you a real simple question about two artists, and I want to finish the rest of this about the new album. But what was one of those little stories that you just kind of like, you look back at and go, wow, that was a really, really good experience because, I just didn't realize, or people didn't realize how special?
Well, one of the ones I would think of would be, Alligator's well known for its electric acts, but we've had a few acoustic artists, and one of the acoustic artists we had is a trio from Virginia, called Sapphire and the Albany Blues Women.
Oh, yeah.
Now, Sapphire came to me, they were a little local act, and they were, they had done a self-produced cassette at that time, and they came to me, and they had done this one cassette, and then they went to a studio in Florida and produced an album and they sent a tape of it to me before they put it out. And I thought, boy, this is a fun little record. You know, this gal, Ann Rapson, can really play good piano, and both she and the guitar player, DJ Ronnie, are real good singers. And this would be a nice little side project for Alligator. I went to see them live because I like to see everybody live before I sign them. And I found them to be just so unpretentious and loads of fun. But they were completely unknown. And I thought, well, I can pick up this record for next to nothing up front, you know, with some royalties involved, of course. And they were willing to start touring a little bit. And you know, maybe we could sell a few of this. But mostly it'll be just like a fun little side project to share with my friends. Well, they started touring, and everywhere they went, they were a sensation. And very, very quickly, they became amongst the very best-selling artists on the label. And that very first record that I picked up, you know, with very little money up front, that they recorded in 2 days in my friend's studio in Florida, we sold about 75,000 copies of.
Nice.
And all three of them became very dear personal friends of mine. They've come and they've stayed with me at my house at various times. We've been on the road together. I've been their producer and co-producer on every record since then. And these are people that I've just been able to bond with. But that was completely unexpected and totally out of the blue. So this little side project becomes one of Alligator's greatest hits.
And you have so many artists, it's impossible. It would take hours to talk about every one of them, but there are two in particular that brought a blues revival in my own life. And one of them is Little Ed in the Blues Imperials, Little Ed Williams, who I've had the pleasure of meeting before a couple of times. And just the nicest guy in the world. And then one I haven't met is Dave Hole out of Perth, Australia. And these two guys, which you've had the pleasure of having on your label, are what I would consider two of the three greatest living slide guitar players. If you don't mind me mentioning the other, I'll throw his name in there too. If that's okay.
What one you mentioned?
Super Chicken's the other one. I tell people the three greatest living slide guitar players here today are Super Chicken, and no in particular order, but Super Chicken, Little Ed Williams, and Dave Hall. And people are like, who? I'm like, here, take the album, go listen, get back to me, tell me what you think, and they're just blown away. And I'll let you tell any story that you want about Little Ed and Dave Hall, and then we'll get into the album, and then we're going to wrap this up.
Okay, well, talking about Little Ed, when I first got to know Ed, I was working on an anthology album called The New Blue Bloods, and I wanted to bring some of the younger bands, the lesser-known bands from Chicago, who I thought had some potential, into the studio to record, a couple of songs each, pick one of those songs, and do 10 bands, 10 tracks of unknown artists. This would have been about 1984 or 85. I had only seen Ed in the band a couple of times, and not for very long. I had known Ed's uncle, J.D. Hutto, who was just a wonderful singer, slide guitar player, who had been recording since the 50s, and actually was J.D.'s booking agent in the early 70s. But I didn't know Ed very well, and I didn't really know all of what the band could do. And I invited him to come to the studio to record a couple of tunes. I booked studio time for the entire day. I booked a 12-hour day, and they were the third band. I figured I'd take about 4 hours per band for them to get in, get their sounds together, record each song a few times, go over the takes, repair anything that was not perfect, maybe do another pass at the vocal. And the first two bands I had done had taken all of their 4 hours each. So Ed and his guys show up at 8 o'clock at night. They come straight out of a winter storm. They're all wearing their rubber boots and their winter coats. And they came into the studio. They had never seen a recording studio before. They came in a little huddle, like they were going to run away at any moment. And I assured them that nothing was going to bite. And we had amps and drums there, so I told them to plug in and just turn up. Make your sound just like the sound in the club. Don't worry about recording Don't worry about being polite. Just do what you know how to do. So they got their sounds together pretty quickly, and within an hour, we had recorded both of the songs that they had rehearsed. We'd done a couple takes on each. They didn't know anything about repairing or doing overdubs or redoing anything, so they just went for it. And they were having a really good time, and they're very much enjoying hearing themselves played back on tape. You know, they've never really heard themselves before in that way. And I realized we had 3 hours more time and nothing else to do. So I said, hey guys, you know, you want to do a few more? Let's see if we get something better than what you've recorded. And Ed launched into doing a show. We were on the other side of the glass in the recording booth, and I was there with my wife and a couple of staffers, the recording engineer, and Ed saw that he had an audience, so he began, doing back bends and dropping to his knees and skidding across the floor and walking on his toes and doing duck walks, and then he'd run back to the mic to sing again. And he was just having a great time. We started dancing and having a party there, and about 10 songs in, I came out of the studio and I said, guys, this is magic. You know, I want you on my label, and we should just continue and make your debut album right now, tonight. And in that remaining those 3 hours, recorded 30 songs. And then I just picked the best ones for that album, which was called Roughhousing. It's exactly how a record should be made. You know, no chance of rethinking and carefully analyzing anything. Just go for it. Just play from the seat of your pants. And you've seen Little Ed, the Blues Imperials, so you know.
Oh yeah.
Even now, they have the same philosophy. You know, they are not the most pristine band. They aren't the most perfect band, but boy, they've got that spirit.
No, I mean, they're amazing. I actually saw him the first time when he was playing with Big Well. This is without the Blues Imperials. When I saw him a few years later with the Blues Imperials, the man jumps. I talked to him in between, and told him, I was a big fan and everything, and what was really cool about him was he jumps off of the stage about 15. This is no exaggeration. I'm sure you've seen this before. 15 to 20 feet, playing the guitar, not missing a note, comes down on the stairs, just walks like it's no big deal, and then sat down by me and sat there and leaned back in the chair, I think, so I could watch his fingers work on the guitar, and stayed there for 2 minutes, and up he was gone.
I saw him come off the 12-foot stage in Japan onto a concrete floor on his knees, skidding down the aisle all the time playing. Yeah,
that does not surprise me. That's why he's one of the two greatest guitar players, the slide guitar players, because he also plays slide, has that bottleneck boogie style to him. The other one, which I've not had the pleasure of seeing yet, and he, because out of necessity from when they were saying breaking his ring finger, had to learn to play slide on his index finger upside down, and that's Dave Hole.
Right. Dave has an amazing style. He plays over the top of the guitar, so you have to imagine that his fingers are pointing downward, within the heel of his hand at the top of the neck. And he learned to play this style, and he plays it with amazing precision. He can do things on guitar I've never seen anybody else do. Not just because of his style, just because he's got a wild, amazing musical imagination. Dave is also a great showman and will bounce around the stage. He's also an absolutely lovely guy. And when we brought him here to tour, because Dave lives as far away as you can from the United States. He lives in Perth, Australia, which is literally the other side of the world. Dave started playing there, listening to people like Muddy Waters and, of course, Elmore James, one of my great musical heroes, and developed his style of combining blues and rock from listening to those guys and then also listening to a lot of British rock bands. Dave is just a highly unusual player. Almost nobody can play what he plays with a slide. He's also, he ended up, he would come here on tour, and he stayed at my house. And Dave is absolutely one of the nicest human beings in the world. Just as sweet and smart as he can be, a great conversationalist. got to hear Dave Hole. You know, as I said, he can do things I seriously believe that nobody else in the world can do.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of Frank Marino from Mahogany Rush, who I hold in high esteem, but I will say this about Dave Hole. When you hear him play Jimi Hendrix, it would literally, I think this is accurate. You tell me if you agree or disagree with this, and people can say this is opinion or whatever. I really believe Jimi Hendrix, if he was able to hear it from beyond the grave, would stand up out of his grave and go, oh, holy crap, and maybe even turn over and cry going, oh my God. I mean, he's literally that amazing.
You know, I'm not going to compare anybody to Hendrix per se, but Dave is absolutely an amazing player, and I've just seen jaws drop watching his playing. There's nobody like him. Unfortunately, he gets to the States very little. So he would tour when you know, at the peak of things, he tried to tour once a year or once every 2 years for maybe a month or 6 weeks. And one of the problems we had in growing the audience for Dave Hole is just not enough people saw him live. It makes all the difference when you can see people like that live. The Alligator's all about music which begins as live music and then is captured in the studio. We don't think of the studio as a place where music should be created. We think of the studio as a place where music should be recorded.
And we've gone a few minutes overboard, I told you, and I apologize for that. But and I know you know this is all important. I want to finish this out because right now you have out the 40th anniversary of Alligator Records, which has the artists we've talked about down there. And it's an amazing retrospective, like we were starting to say, going back to Hans Taylor from the very, very beginning to currently. And I want you to take as long or short as you'd like to do this before we wrap this up. And we'll do the social networking, and I'm just going to let you take us out of here with whatever you like to say at the end. But I would like you to say whatever you'd like to say about the album, share about the album for a few minutes if that's okay, and maybe things that you never get a chance anywhere yet to tell anybody that you'd like people to know, or maybe there's an artist that you want people to really know about on there too and really take a listen to. So I'm gonna let you have this part of it, Bruce.
Okay, well thank you. And as you can imagine, when you've been doing this for 40 years and you've got basically 160 minutes to try to summarize everything you've done for 40 years, and you also at the same time, or at least I wanted to show the direction the label was going in. So I wanted to make sure that all of my current artists, as well as our classic artists, were represented on the album. It was very, very tough to choose what was going to be included, and more tough to choose what was going to be excluded. Some of it was gut, some of it was sort of choices that I made that I thought were important for the label image. And some of it had to do with how one song flowed into another. But I wanted to include all of our classic artists like Albert Taylor and Coco Taylor and Albert Collins and Lonnie Brooks and Sun Seals and Johnny Winter and Roy Buchanan. I wanted to include all of our current roster, and that would be Marcia Ball, again, Lonnie Brooks, who's been with us since the 70s, Bucky Zydeco, Tommy Castro, Eddie Clearwater, the Chief, as we call him, James Cotton. I wanted to include Shanika Copeland, who is technically not on the label at this moment, but still remains a friend of the family. The great guitar player from Atlanta, Tinsley Ellis, Rick Eston and the Nightcaps, Guitar Shorty. These are all our current artists, the Holmes Brothers, Smokin' Joe Kubek and Janelle Benoist King, your favorite Little Ed the Blues Imperials, and Eric Lindell from New Orleans, and Jennifer Magnus, this great singer from California. Trying to get all these people in was just a job from hell. And I was making decisions right up to the last minute as far as who was going to be on this collection, as far as the order of songs, and I even, in order to squeeze in a little more music, I even went back to some of the songs that had a fade-out ending, which works for some songs and not others. And sometimes I would listen and say, well, gee, could I shorten this song by 10 seconds by having it fade a little bit faster? Because if I could do this on enough songs, I can squeeze lot of people put the music into an iPod or play it on random. I worked very hard with the order of songs, trying to make sure that each disc flowed from beginning to end, and each song worked right, one coming into another. So, it's called the Alligator Records 40th Anniversary Collection. It's 2 CDs for the price of one, and boy, I'm pretty damn proud of this thing. I supervised all of the remastering of all of the tracks. I wanted to make a statement that, I'm hoping I'll be doing this for another 40 years, but, I started in 1971. I'm now, much to my amazement, over 60 years old, and I've got to assume that at some point, I'll be unable to do this anymore. I suppose at some point I'll be dead. And so I better make sure that if I'm going to make a collection like this, that if this is the last great collection of Alligator that I put together, and I sure hope it won't be, that it's going to stand the test of time.
Well, I'm going to ask you one last question, but I want to make a comment just because we're wrapping up. If I can make one comment and a compliment to you. There are a couple of labels out there I'm not going to mention, but they're rock labels and that. They're a little bit different. And there's a gentleman, it's a small independent rock label up in the Midwest, up in Iowa. And he does everything he touches basically is gold. He does not put out anything that labels crap in any way, shape, or form. You have, and I think this compliment has to be paid, you have had an ability, and just, I don't know if you want to say it was a blessing by God, right place, right time, just the luck of the draw, lady luck smiled on you, fate, or whatever. You have basically put a repertoire and a discography and a catalog together and brought to the world some of the most amazing artists that had you not done that, the world would have missed out. I mean, you even have one album with Red Buchanan with Stevie Ray Vaughan on there. You've touched the world in a lot of ways, and there's nothing on your label that could ever be considered crap or garbage or filler. Everything it's just all it comes down to is it's a matter of taste. Do you like Buckwheat Zydeco? Do you like Sapphire? Do you like Shemekia Copeland? Do you like Little Ed Williams? It's more of a matter of a personal taste, but you've had an amazing ability to just bring something wonderful every single time it comes up. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you. That's one of the reasons I'm very, very thankful that I've been able to work with some of your artists, and I look forward to continuing to do that. It's amazing, and I don't know what it is. It's maybe you just have the Midas touch, the gold touch, but it's just, I think it needs to be said, it's just amazing what you've done all these years.
Well, thank you. I'm very complimented by your saying that. All I've really done is I followed my gut. When the music reaches that spot in you that it feels like, yeah, this is helping me. This music is making me feel better than I felt. This music is touching that innermost part of me. I hesitate to use the word touching my soul because it sounds a little pretentious, but that's kind of how I feel. That this music that we record should be healing music. It should be music that they say in Chicago, you listen to the blues to get rid of the blues. Well, that's exactly right. The music that we're making should be able to soothe the deepest part of people's souls, and also should be able to get you on your feet and excite you and make you want to move around. We want to, the slogan of the label is genuine house rocket music, but we want to rock your body and rock your soul.
I agree with that. I don't think I could say that better myself. Let's start with the social. We're going to wrap this up. Let's start with the social networking. And first of all, it's the 40th anniversary collection, Alligator Records, brand new, 38 tracks. And where can everybody find you and the label online as far as I'm going to let you start with the website, and then we can do, if you still use MySpace, I know that's starting to become a dead issue in a lot of ways, and Facebook and Twitter.
I'm not the social networking expert here in my company, but the first place you should go is to the Alligator Records website, which is just alligator.com. We started online very early, and that name was available, so we snatched it up. We have an Alligator Records as one word, 2 R's there, Alligator Records Facebook page, and you sign up there. You notifications on everything we're doing. If you sign up on the website and give us your zip code, we'll let you know when every one of our artists is in your area. You'll get an email blast from us letting you know where the artist is playing, what time, how much it costs to get there, to get in there. And if you're on Twitter, I know that we're on Twitter, but I can't remember whether I think it's just going to Alligator Records, and I wish I'd known that that question was coming.
No, that's okay.
I didn't prepared.
That's okay. Don't worry about that. I think there may be an RSS feed on the website for that, too. But I want to point out one thing, too, because the website is very, very easy to negotiate. You will get to hear different Alligator Records artists on the music player on there, but also even if you're just, in addition to signing up, let's say that you're going to take a trip. Let's say I'm going to take a trip to Miami. I can also go on the website under Tour and Artist, and I can actually click in a city, and it will tell me where they're going to be playing at, too, and the whole schedule. So I can even schedule vacation around your artist as well. It's a great website, very easy to work with.
Well, we worked very hard on it, and in fact, we're in the process of making it even better. And within a couple of months, we'll be launching an improved version, which will have all the features you're talking about, and lots more, including many, many more music samples.
Nice. And I'm going to let you take us out of here, and when you're done, if you could just hang on the phone for just one microsecond, because I want to say thank you again. But first of all, I want to say thank you. I appreciate everything, Bruce.
Oh, well, I'm very happy to talk to your listeners, and very honored that you would ask me.
And this is what I'd like you to do. Everybody that I interview, I let them take us out of here by saying anything in like a couple, 3, 4, 5 minutes, as long as short as they'd like to go. And I've had everything from musicians telling spouses, I love you, I miss you, I'll see you when I'm home, to had guys in the band, to, I've had a couple guys get very prophetic, and to down to generally, I just want to say thank you to whomever. But also in that, I'd like to, as you take us out of here, I'd like to extend you the opportunity to say something that you've always wanted the opportunity to say about Alligator or any of the artists in particular that you've never maybe been given the opportunity to say before. So as you take us out, maybe start with that, and then I'll let you wrap it up.
Thanks for sticking me with saying something that I wasn't prepared for and should have to think about. I've got to say I've been one of the luckiest human beings in the world to envision, to dream of doing this, and then to actually spend 40 years of your life living out your dream, to be in the presence of giants of music, and have to play songs that were, literally being played for me. This is so much beyond my wildest expectations in life. If a giant meteor drops on my house today, and this is the last conversation I ever have, I'm a happy man. This has been a great life. I want to have lots more of it, but boy, it's been so satisfying for so long that there's so little I can complain about in life. I would like to say that my whole life was my work and my music up until 16 years ago when I got married, and marriage has been a huge blessing to me because I married not only one of the nicest people I know, but one of the most tolerant people I know, because my wife puts up with all of my crap and all of my crazy hours and all of my trips and all of my, I'm sorry, honey, I can't be home, I've got to go listen to music now. And I don't know how she does it. Other than that, this tradition, this music, this blues music, this is music that comes out of the deepest suffering that people can have. It's literally created by people was created by people in bondage, and they created this music to deal with how hard their lives were. And so this healing process, this soul healing that the blues can do, I think is kind of magical. And I've been lucky enough to be, the guy who's brought that magic to some other people. The Coco Taylor said to me, bless the bridge that carries you across. And believe me, I've tried to be the bridge that carries the blues across.
And I am going to say thank you. And again, I want to mention one more thing too, because a couple of you people you've been affiliated with, one of your artists, I want to throw this in there as a tidbit to take it out a little bit different this time. If anybody's going to be in Kissimmee, Florida this weekend, coming up, April 30th, among others, is going to be Shamikia Copeland playing in Kissimmee, Florida at Blues Fest down there.
And she is as good a blues singer as you will ever hear in your life.
And also artists you've had on your label as well. Elvin Bishop's going to be down there, and Kenny Neal's going to be down there too.
Then somebody's going to have a lot of fun hearing a lot of good music.
Yeah, and I'm going to say interview over.